third session of the CJL Fireside Chat with an incredible guest called Mr. Jon Medved. Most of you have heard of Mr. Medved, but just a few words of introduction for those of you who haven't. He's a good friend. He's full of energy. He's always an optimist. Serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and angel investor in Israel's high-tech scene. He's the founder of and the CEO of OurCrowd, a leading equity crowdfunding platform based in Israel with investments all around the world. The rapid development of OurCrowd in the last 7 years to become, I believe, the world's largest equity crowdfunding platform and Israel's most active venture investor. It is our pleasure, Jon. It is an honor. You're a busy guy, but you always ask busy guys if you want to get things done. So we thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to go straight into it. So, Jon, what about the current crisis worries you the most? And what gives you the most hope?
So let's start with the hope part first. I have enormous hope because of the pace of entrepreneurial activity and the sheer creativity and science that is coming out of this crisis in an unprecedented rate. I don't think I've ever seen people producing so much incredible activity in terms of new tests and vaccines. Right now, the latest count is there are 89 groups around the world working on a vaccine. But it's not just the output, it's the collaboration, the fact that people are working across borders, across companies, without as much regard for intellectual property. They're just trying to get it done. And so I think the whole response of the creative community, of the scientific community, in fact, I dare say of mankind, has been heartening. I think most people have responded to this with kindness, with helping each other, with trying to help everybody get through it. And I think it's actually, when you look at it, it's one of mankind's greatest moments in terms of just the sheer chesed that seems to be really dominating most people's response to this. My fear, which is a big fear, and I'm pretty certain that it's coming true, is that the world doesn't go back to what it was before this crisis. That right now we haven't understood that fully, and it's hard for us to get our hands around this because we all want to snap our fingers or click our heels, and it's just, status quo ante, okay, of a couple of months ago. But that's not going to happen. The old world that we knew before is never coming back. We can't go home again. And no matter how much we want it to be, it's not going to be. Now, it's not entirely clear what these changes are going to be. We're seeing many of them happening now. We're seeing many trends that started before the crisis accelerate dramatically. And whether it's delivery of food at home or working from home or exercising at home, people realizing that they don't need offices as much as they once thought they did, this whole Zoom culture, this stuff is not going to change. We're not going to snap back. And while we will at some point start flying in airplanes again and hopefully go to concerts of your favorite music and maybe even see a play or a movie, I have a feeling it's not going to be the same. That we are literally in a new world as a result of this crisis.
Can you elaborate on the perhaps with more detail on the chesed, on the kindness, on the collaboration between people, individuals, organizations, companies that are in a more collaborative mode due to this crisis?
Well, look, part of what I'm seeing is colored by the unique environment here in Israel. But it seems as though the TV broadcasts have gone to just one constant uh, rendition of one act of chesed after another. And whether it's people bringing food to elderly people or singing to them, on their balconies. There are people who are taking cranes and lifting people so they can, show their grandchildren to their grandparents. When you think of the heroism of the medical staff, whether it's an NHS in your country or in Kupat Cholim here, when you look at the amount of donations and charitable contributions that are being made across the board, I think that people are really going out of their way to be good. And I think most people are following the instructions. In our country, during the lockdown, Yom Kippur was not as locked down. Okay, there was just nobody in the streets. The wild pigs have taken over Haifa. You might have seen those pictures
Yeah.
of the boars, right? Because there are no people, and I find this to be heartening. It's sad, but the fact that people are following the rules and are trying to be good, I think, is a real wonderful thing. And there are a lot of mitzvahs being done. A lot of mitzvahs, and you'll always hear about the outlier, people who socially gathered at a funeral or did something wrong or got angry at the police or whatnot. And there are obviously cases like that. But I think that in general, the response of mankind has been positive, not just on the level of the entrepreneurs and the scientists who are busy on the front lines, but to everybody.
Continuing on that theme with regard to the guidance, the measures taken by the Israeli authorities and the government in dealing with this coronavirus pandemic, Israel seems to be in a relatively good position regarding the response to this pandemic. Can you explain and elaborate the key factors that have made this possible?
Well, first of all, just the data. The data is that, while any death is a horrible, terrible thing, in Israel, the total number of deaths has been just over 200. And our mortality rate is one of the lowest in the world. It's in the top 10 lowest, meaning I think it's about number 5 as of today, 1.3 per confirmed case. We were very afraid, like many countries, of having our healthcare system overwhelmed because there weren't enough ventilators or enough beds. And yet we really never went above 100 people on vents. And there are thousands of them available. God forbid, should we need them. When you look at what's going on with the curve, we flattened the curve. So, and more than flattened it, we've now started a very steep descent. And it's starting to look almost Gaussian. It's basically gone up and it's come all the way down. Now we're coming out of lockdown here in Israel, and we'll see, if we can manage to keep the infections and the deaths down, even in the context of a newly released society. But what was done right here was that the government acted extremely quickly, much quicker than almost any other government in the world. In Asia, they reacted quick because they had experience in the past. But Israel was one of the first countries, I think it was the first country in the West to start blocking flights from China. And then we started blocking flights from everywhere or most everywhere. And, the government really took aggressive moves to educate the people and sort of slowly but surely got us into a disciplined behavior. Unfortunately, the economic damage has been severe. We have now over 1 million people unemployed, which is a lot for Israel. We were pretty much on a full employment economy, and now we have over 20% unemployed, and it's going to be a real challenge to bring them back. But I was sort of proud of our country, very proud, because it was really about pikuach nefesh. In other words, people knew what they were doing in terms of taking the economic hit, but human life becomes precedent. And even if it was affecting only old people, dafka in a Jewish state, you have to protect and respect and cherish your old people. And that's what our country did. And that's why I think we've been incredibly fortunate so far.
And look, it is quite incredible because the culture, the Israeli culture, is independence and outdoors and intimate, and yet at the same time, when the government, the authorities advised and imposed this guidance, it was very strictly adhered to. So that's incredibly encouraging. And
part of it is that we're used to emergencies, unfortunately, right? In other words, this isn't our first rodeo, as they say in America. And Israelis know that when sirens happen, you go seek shelter. They know that, there are, unfortunately, in times of crisis, you go and you serve the country. There's huge amounts of volunteering that goes on here all the time. People serve. Okay, there's a strong sense of get beyond the narcissistic I and to give back to society and to give back to the country. And there's a sense of no matter how much we fight with each other, there's a sense of belonging. What's shocking, by the way, is how much, by the way, they've done polls in the last couple of weeks about Israeli sense of belonging, and they're now at all-time new highs, where over 90% of the people feel a strong identification. And this, by the way, includes Arab Israelis and Haredi Israelis. It's quite remarkable. And so I think that we were unfairly advantaged by having a society that knows how the drill works. Okay, and this was just another terrible drill that we've gone through, and we know we can make it happen.
That's very encouraging to hear. Can you explain briefly what practical suggestions as to what most people in Israel can do to help others in this moment of crisis?
Look, I think that just the fact that people reach out to their friends, or especially people who are either elderly or by themselves. I mean, the hardest part of this whole process was the Seder for many, many people, where there were too many people who were either one or two people at a Seder, and that's just not right. And I know that according to Chazal, even if, there are cases in the past of people being by themselves where they have to ask themselves the four questions. But it was very, very hard for people to go through that. And yet, one of the great things people would do is they were calling each other, and not just, the closest members of your family, your closest friends, but there was just a lot of reaching out to larger networks where you wanted to see how you're doing. And that, I think, is a hugely impactful thing, that in this time of crisis, to reach out to your friends. It's a great time to pick up the phone and talk to people you haven't spoken to in years. Okay, no better time than now, because they want to hear from you. And I think that's something important. I think that giving tzedakah, helping those who are really in need, because look, people who have means can take a hit for a month or two or three without salary, or if their stock portfolio goes down. Okay. But the people who live month to month, the people who, are barely getting by, they are in deep trouble. And so the need to support charitable organizations, those that provide food for a Shabbos table, or those that help school kids get books, or provide drugs and health. I mean, it's just that stuff is important. And I think that for us who are business people, the most important thing you can do is to get your business working as best it can, to make sure that you can retain your employees, that you can, God willing, if you've had to let some people go, bring the others back or expand your business, because the business community now is going to be called upon to lead. It's not just the government bailout and the government providing stimulus, which is critical. And thank God, it seems like most of the governments in the world are doing a pretty good job of this. But it's going to require almost superhuman effort of business leaders to step up, each and every one, and to lead. And to lead is not just to make sure that your employees are safe and that you ensure social distancing when they come back to work and whatnot, but to build your business in such a way that will get out of this unemployment curse. Because the curse of unemployment is one of the worst things in the world. And if we don't get these people back to work, this recovery will be very, very long indeed.
Looking to the future, if we can, under these circumstances, when do you think this will end? How long does this go on for? I mean, as I said, difficult to say anything concrete, but obviously you're thinking about these things. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think that the real question is that when does 70, 80, 90% of the world's population have access to a vaccine, right? So that we are not afraid of being infected. And I'm relatively optimistic that this could happen within 12 to 18 months. Probably, if you asked me to be a betting man, I would say probably more like 18 months, which means that we're going to be living with this through the better part of next year. That, next, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, God willing, we should have a very celebratory, perhaps Simchas Torah, okay, with a lot of kavana and a lot of mashke and a lot of hugging, okay, which is something I miss a lot. And that's, by the way, the hardest thing here in Israel, because we are such a touchy-feely society. Israelis love to get in your face and talk to it. Social distancing is hard for us, okay? I think it's hard for Jews as a people. But I think we're probably going to be about a year and a half away from the end of this, if we're lucky. The problem here is that nobody knows that we'll actually get a vaccine to work. I'm optimistic. I think it probably will work, but there are many scientists who are saying don't bet on it, because if you look at, for example, HIV, we still haven't got a vaccine for that. Okay, there are diseases that sometimes prove resistant to this, do not allow themselves to come up with a vaccine for them, and let's hope this isn't the case. We're actually investing now at OurCrowd in a great project called MigVax, which is one of the 3 or 4 projects in Israel that we know about, that people are working on the vaccine. This comes out of the Galil, and we're optimistic that we'll be testing this on humans coming this summer. Now, it's going to take some time after the tests start, but if we get into humans in the summer, we have a shot at being one of the first, because the company that we're backing had been working for 4 years, would you believe, on chicken viruses that were caused by a different coronavirus. And they had figured out a more generic way to deal with the coronavirus. They've tested the vaccine on chickens and it works. And now they're busy putting the finishing touches on the modifications so it'll work with humans. But if you can imagine how our grandparents, especially grandmothers, used to say that chicken soup is essentially the Jewish penicillin. And now maybe Israel will bring a vaccine to the world and will feed chicken soup to the world to make them healthy, that would be a real machaya.
Well, yes, that was widely reported, as I'm sure you know, in the press. And John, we wish you, all the Jewish people and the whole world, much success in that endeavor. And perhaps you can be surprised in a pleasant way that 18 months is even less so. That's wonderful news. You say a light unto the nations. That includes a healing to the nations too. It would be a wonderful thing for Israel and the whole world. Going back to the exit strategy, what changes do you think are going to have to be made to how business operate in the future? In order to maintain an economy whilst providing social distancing. How does that work?
Look, we have an app for that. It's really a tough question because, for example, imagine yourself in a factory. You're now responsible to make sure that your employees stay socially distant. And you can talk to them and educate them and put up posters and make broadcasts. Stay apart, stay apart. But what you really need is an application that measures their distance and shows you as the business owner what's going on the factory floor. And God forbid, if someone proves to have been sick, who has been in contact with that person so you can trace them. So we have a company called Visible Zone who actually have developed an app and they're testing it now with very large companies in Israel, and hopefully it will soon be available for the world to do that. I think that it really depends on what the business is. If you're a high-tech business, okay, then you're basically making sure, at least in our country, the rules are no more than 8 people in a conference room. There's so many square meters of space that each person needs. So it's going to be basically not filling up. I mean, our office has always been quite crowded. So we're going to have to, keep some of our people working from home. And you're going to have to in hairdressers, which have just reopened here. I literally got a haircut and they went a little too wild on my beard. So now my wife is for the first time seeing my face without a beard, and she says she wants to sue me for false advertising. But the reality is, you go to these haircut salons, and now they're dressed in masks and the full visor. There are plastic dividers at stores protecting people. And these things, I'm afraid, are going to be part of our new normal, right? This kind of never being able to get the virus out of your perception. And I don't know what that impact is on human living, but walking around with a mask here, masks are required. You can be fined if you don't have a mask. And going into settings where every place you walk into, they've got to test your temperature. And by the way, we have companies who are working on more advanced sensor arrays that will, check all kinds of things from afar, contactless. So this is just part of what we're going to have to get used to. And hopefully we can learn to live with the virus without seeing these terrible spikes in infection and death, and keep the spread mitigated.
Moving to the venture capital and in particular OurCrowd, how do you see this effect of this virus, this pandemic, on your portfolio companies in general? And are there any sectors you see that are actually benefiting, and which sectors are particularly hit as a result of this pandemic?
So, like in most things, I think in Jewish tradition, we always believe there are tzaddikim, there are rashaim, and there are benonim. Okay, there are righteous people, there are evil people, And there's most of us who are in between. And this is, I think, a reasonable sort of paradigm for understanding what's going on in most venture capital portfolios. Now, at OurCrowd, we have 200 portfolio companies, so it's a big group. We have 20 funds. We're managing about 1.4 billion in commitments, dollars, that is. And so we have three buckets. We have the companies that are in deep trouble. And these companies are focused on businesses and sectors that are being hit badly. For example, anything having to do with travel, hospitality, sports, commercial real estate, co-working. These things, whatever you can want to do about it, these guys have taken a real body blow. And they must, as best they can, reduce their spending, and wait for better days. And there hopefully will be, but they're really in trouble at the moment. The sectors that are doing well, on the other hand, are anything having to do with fighting the virus, and this could be, DNA testing or blood testing. People who are building, software systems to manage disease as digital health platforms. People who are engaged in what's called telehealth or remote diagnosis. We have a company called TytoCare that just raised $50 million 2 weeks ago. Okay, who provide a set of diagnostic tools so that patients can be seen from afar. Companies that are working on the vaccine, companies that are essentially helping accentuate some of those trends I spoke about. So we have a company called Cryon that does RPA, or robotic process automation, where bots write the software. These companies are all doing very well, and they're raising money, and their sales are going up. And it's hard to say this in a situation where there's so much pain, but these companies are actually doing better. And then there's the bulk of the companies that are somewhere in between. And they're trying to save their money. They're trying to cut their expenses. They're trying to stay close to their customers because that's more important than ever today. And where possible, they're trying to stay relevant. They're trying to pivot into a way that will help people. And you see this happening with a lot of companies. So we have a lighting company called Jugano, who make very advanced LED lights that come with sensors and essentially a network control function. And they're really quite an exciting lighting company. All of a sudden, they realized that if they integrated UV LEDs into this LED unit, then when people are outside of a room, they can use the UV light to literally kill virus and to reduce virus. So you've taken this product, which they've managed to engineer now, so that during the day, when people are working, it's just a normal, intelligent light. And then when they go home and leave the room, it goes into cleaning mode to try to clean the virus out of the and other harmful elements. So there are all kinds of things in the middle, with companies now pivoting and trying to get more relevant to help some of these issues.
So, Jon, you've got your hands full.
That is the truth.
Look, please God, these challenges, like we say in the story right at the beginning of Exodus, we say, as they afflicted the Jewish people, so did they, were they fruitful and multiply. And I think it's the story of the Jewish people. We become stronger when we are tested. This crisis, how does it change your investment style, your strategy going forward? This is something, a curveball, like you say in America. How do things change going forward?
Look, I think that we will be focused more on healthcare and wellness pandemic prevention mitigation than ever before, right? Vaccines were not a popular investment area for most investors. We didn't spend enough money creating new tests. Contact tracing, who knew what that was before, right? In other words, and this is all going to change. In Israel, we have a huge, wonderful bunch of researchers doing life science and health-related research, except they were always essentially the weakest link in terms of capital. Most of the capital would go to the quote sexy things like cybersecurity or e-commerce or social this or the cloud. And medical, yes, got investment, but never got the equivalent amount of investment relative to its sheer amount of knowledge in the academia and in the research worlds. That's changing. And from now on, I think that this will be a much more sexy area of investment. And, we have the reason that we have so many companies fighting the virus now is that we had a pretty good size health care portfolio of 28 direct investments, a digital health fund. We'll be soon announcing a new fund to fight the pandemic, and we'll be going out to raise money for that shortly. As I mentioned, just last week, we announced our vaccine company, which had an unprecedented response. So I think that people are woke now, and they realize that this is important and a great place to invest. I think that the key here is to be able to understand the future trends and the fact that what we're in now is a really interesting entry point for investors who want to take part in venture capital. Because on the one hand, in a financial crisis, prices come down, and it's hard if you're holding a big portfolio to fight and try to support your companies. But it's great to be an investor with cash because the prices you're paying are lower, and you're not investing for a 3-month or 6-month time horizon. You're investing over years. So traditionally, financial crises have been great vintage years for venture capital investment. But in addition to that, we're now in a not just financial crisis, but we're in a civilizational, cultural, social watershed, inflection point, where all of these trends that we spoke about are now essentially accelerating to warp speed, which seems to be becoming a popular phrase again today. And they really are catching fire. So to the extent that you can see these trends and try to predict where this is going and find companies that are addressing it, then you're going to make, outsized returns by taking the risk now to invest in these companies.
You mentioned obviously we're in a recession, and many things are still playing out, and we're not sure exactly the extent of that. What do you think? Do you think is this a prolonged recession or something more V-shaped? How long do you think this lasts?
Okay, that's probably above my pay grade. That question, I think you have to ask these chief economists of the big banks. But I'll tell you, I'm not sure we've already snapped back. While the markets, have come way back from where they were just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm as delighted as the next person. Good markets are good for my business, and we want them to be good. But I wouldn't bet on this staying this way forever. I think that as we start to realize the real damage that has been done to the economy, this is not just a temporary damage. There is real serious damage being done. Trying to get all these people back to work is going to be a huge challenge. And I think when people start seeing the numbers from companies, that they're going to be realizing that we could be in this for a while. And I don't know, again, I don't know if it's a year or 6 months or 18 months or even longer. But I think that this is not just a 1 or 2 month blip and then it's back to normal. I sure hope so. That would be wonderful. And we could drink a l'chaim together soon and celebrate that. But I wouldn't bet on it.
Yes, please God, very soon, and not just virtually, but
Yes.
in the flesh, in Israel, ideally. Let me ask you like this: entrepreneurs who obviously are going through these times, hit hard. How do they plan? How should they plan ahead differently compared to what they did before the crisis?
Well, first of all, we have been advising people for the last year to a year and a half to stock up on cash, because we were really in a marketplace where money was readily available and it was relatively easy. It was one of the best times, perhaps the best time in history, to raise money for venture capital adventures. And luckily, many of our companies heeded our advice and stocked up on cash, because now cash is the most critical resource, right? In other words, now it's not easy unless you're in an area that's really been helped by the virus to raise additional capital. So the easiest capital you can raise is the money that you cut from your monthly burn rate, the expenses. So if you're in a company where you're saying, okay, how do I survive this? And you can figure out a way to cut, let's say, $100,000 from your budget monthly over an 18-month period, that's the equivalent of just raising almost $2 million in cash. It's very hard to make that cut. It comes with human costs very often, because in high tech, your basic expenses are usually manpower, but it is the most important cut you can make because it literally provides more cash. And we're advising our companies to have between 18 to 24 months of cash minimum right now to weather the storm, because you don't want to have to be out in the market of the next 3 or 6 months unless things are going really well for you, trying to raise money, because that money is going to demand a very low valuation. Markets have come down, prices in the venture capital area have come down, and the cash is really critical. There are many companies that are going to die. There are many startups that are not going to make it because they're going to run out of cash. And what happens often is that people are in denial. They don't see how deep the crisis is. They continue spending money. And when they wake up and say, uh-oh, I better cut, it's too late. And therefore, our advice to most of our people is, if you need to cut deep and cut early, and then save your cash, and you'll be able to rehire people later, because there'll be this market which will allow you to choose very, very talented people at even lower pay scale. I mean, we, for example, many of our companies are cutting salaries. There are ways to save money, not just by letting people go, but by everybody taking a pay cut. And many high-tech companies are seeing graduated pay cuts, where the highest paid employees and the owners are taking sometimes 20 and 25% or more, and the lower paid people are taking 10% or on a sliding scale. So this becomes really important. The critical issue is, how do you make sure that your revenue stays intact, that you don't lose customers, that the customers are feeling real value from the service that you're providing. And the issue for these startups is, startups must grow, right? The sort of primary commandment for a startup is that thou must grow. And it's hard to grow in this kind of a market when you can't get face to face with your customer, when it's difficult to get their attention. And that's why our companies are trying to stay relevant, trying to find an angle, a way that their product, whether it's putting UV lights, into your LEDs, or it's stressing the fact that we have a company called Texi that provides technical assistance for people at home or companies through your cell phone. So you don't need a technician to come into your house because he's not coming in anymore. You might lose your internet. Good luck getting a technician to come in. Okay? But guess what? We have a product called Texi that provides that. Turns out this has become incredibly relevant today. And, with customers like Vodafone and Verizon in the US, and they're doing exceptionally well. They simply, are having their phone ring off the hook, and their email blow up from so many people who want that service.
Let's move to investment related questions. What are the key traits that you look for when investing in entrepreneurs?
Three things we look at: people, people, and people. It's sort of like that old adage about, real estate: location, location, location. This is a people business, and you have to find people who are not just intelligent and wickedly smart about their specific area of endeavor, but they have to be passionate. They usually should be able to communicate the excitement to both other people, especially people they need to hire or recruit, as well as investors. And, so we spend a lot of time both talking to the people, asking them questions, verifying what they say to make sure it makes sense. And, obviously we look at markets, and we look at, their references, and we look at, the degree to which they have technology and how much traction they have, right? What have they managed to accomplish before we invested? We look for co-investors of note, people we trust who are there. We look for, is there a good board, advisors? What is the, competitive landscape? All that stuff, which is, pretty obvious. But it's always going to boil down to the people, because, you really can do all kinds of things to change your business, to change your pricing, to change your product. You can also change people, but it's much more difficult. And the heart of any tech company is its people. Someone, I think, real smart said that every tech company, the major assets go home every night sometimes, and you just don't know if they're going to show up in the morning or not. So it's really about those people.
Any advice you could give young entrepreneurs, generally and obviously, particularly under these conditions?
I think that given the amount of change that is afoot, given the disruption and the sort of sense of we're on the cusp of a new world, whatever that's going to be, this is a great time for you to think about building a business. Figure it out. Figure out where we're going. What are the problems that need solution? There are a lot of problems out there. And start talking to your friends. My biggest advice to people is don't keep these ideas to yourself. People often, I think, feel wrongly that they shouldn't talk to other people about their ideas because someone's going to steal it or, utilize it. And if that's the only advantage you have is the idea, then forget about it. Go find another career. What you do need is to find other people who will be your ezer kenegdo, the way that Chava was described for Adam Arishon, as a helpmate who was against you. You need somebody who's not going to say, "Oh, that's wonderful," okay, but somebody who's going to call you and say, "Nah, I'm not sure about that one." Somebody who's going to help you refine your idea and make more sense going forward. And the way you get started is you start talking to people. And then you start putting some stuff on paper. It doesn't have to be long sentences and business plans, but outlines and slides. And you try to design products and make them look like a demo. And what's remarkable today is how quickly you can do this without really spending much money, because you can, get cloud services, you can rent coders, on the internet. You can rent software in a SaaS model. And so what used to take, a huge amount of effort and time, there's open source software. You can get a lot of stuff done today. And it's a great business. I love the idea of creating, yesh ma'ayin. I think that, ex nihilo, that Jews are good at this, okay, because we're close to the Kadosh Baruch Hu in terms of, understanding that it's our job to help uh, God finish creation. Creation is not done. It's our obligation to be part of it. And the creation of a company, based on an idea, based on a technology where you take a real problem which you're solving, and especially those problems which will help people's lives, save them in the medical sense, or feed them, or make them more secure or more comfortable. That's a wonderful thing. And I'm very proud to be in Israel. And it's really, when you think about it, the Jewish state has now become the startup nation, and it's recognized as such all over the world. And that's what Jews are supposed to do, right? I mean, we talk about Or Lagoyim, and hopefully our midot, our characteristics, will be reflective of a noble people. But you know what? Actions speak louder than words, and we have just a great track record of doing great things. This little tiny country, not so tiny anymore. We're approaching 10 million people, but you realize how much we've done and will do for the world. And it's a sense of great pride to me as a Jew and as a citizen of Israel.
Well, the Chazal, our sages in the Talmud, do say, in fact, that God has made us, each and every one of us, an equity partner in this great endeavor. And it's important that we take it as literally as it was meant. Yes, and the story of Israel, especially of recent, is an incredible demonstration of that, making the world a better place. What sectors do you think will make them have the most innovation in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think there are enormous sectors that are emerging. We've talked a lot about healthcare and telemedicine, digital health, the ability to manage disease from your cell phone, the ability to get advanced sensors out of. I mean, we're looking now. There, people are doing ultrasound on the cell phone, and urine analysis on the cell phone, and little devices that are giving you clinical grade inputs from in your throat and nose and ears, which you can then either send off to a doctor, or send it to an AI, an artificially intelligent, platform. This is huge stuff. But food is really important. And we were investors in a company called Beyond Meat that makes plant-based burgers and fake pork and fake chicken and everything else. And that was an extraordinarily successful investment for us. And that company is not only feeding people, but is having a much smaller impact on. It's having a positive impact on the planet, because to create this kind of plant-based protein relative to animal protein is really an advantage. We've got 2 food incubators, by the way, one in New Zealand and one in the north of Israel, where we're looking for new companies. And we're investing in a company out in California called Blue Nalu, who are doing tissue protein for fish, so that we can, essentially grow fish tissue and enjoy fish in the future. We're invested in a plant-based protein replacement for milk called Ripple, which is doing, very well. We're invested in a company called Duma Toke, who are creating real sugar, but with twice the potency, meaning you can eat half of it. And believe me, I need that. Many of us do. So I'm a believer in food and ag tech. I think that when you look at a country like India and see that 60 or 70% of their population is still engaged in agriculture, and to put the power of digital agriculture into the hands of these small farmers and to improve their lives and their yields. Tremendous opportunities there, as well as the big farms in the US and in Brazil. And we have a whole slew of companies that are using, a company like Tyrannus, who are using drones and can, manage your fields, or CropX, who are putting sensors in the ground, or Consumer Physics, who have shrunk spectrometers into a little key fob so you can tell when the corn should be harvested. That excites me a lot. I'm a believer still in cybersecurity. I think, unfortunately, the hackers don't sleep much these days, and they're making me a little sleepless because I'm worried about what they're trying to do. And I believe that they're going to come after our medical devices, and whether it's a pacemaker or a ventilator, they're going to send you a ransom note that's going to say, I've got control of it. You got 30 minutes to live, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm a believer in that. I'm a believer in robotics broadly stressed. I think that we're going to be using robots not just in the factory and in the home, but robots to write software code. Robots to do so many parts of our lives. Artificial intelligence is changing everything, and we've got companies that are using AI not just to improve the performance of our cars so we don't hit other people, but to do test analysis for online learning. And that's unbelievable. So, really asking me is sort of like I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I believe that there's a cornucopia of new technologies that are changing the world in almost every area of human endeavor. And I believe very much so that AI is driving the fourth industrial revolution. And that when you look at it, it's steam and, then electricity, and then followed by, the digital revolution. The next revolution will be the artificially intelligent revolution. And I think that we are about ready to see a pace of change, the likes of which we've never seen before.
Jon, on a personal note, I want to say it's fascinating to see and hear and feel, even through the virtual mediums, your passion, your excitement. There are so many companies that you are invested in. There are so many things you have to oversee and manage, the good news, the bad news. What motivates you to continue working in this intense way?
Look, I am very, very. Just at that moment, my wife knocks on the door and says, "Are you done yet?" We're 2 hours ahead of you guys in London.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Look, this is about the greatest job anybody could have, because what I get to do is I get to meet incredible people who are dreamers, who are scientists, who are technologists, who are leaders, who are builders, and you get to enable them to make change and to help people. So much of what we're doing has a positive social impact. It's not just about making money, but it's about a double bottom line. So to get up every morning and sort of look at my calendar and see who are the people I'm going to be meeting that day, it's a pretty exciting thing. On the other hand, there are, issues along the way when you lose companies, when you have to fire people, when you have to realize that your company's out of money, when someone else beats you to the punch. These are things that aren't easy, and it's a little bit disturbing. But in general, I feel very blessed. I have thank God, a lovely family and lovely partners at my business. And I just want to stay healthy and able to create more, because the scary thing is that life is very, very short. I don't believe that I've crested 60. Okay, it freaks me out. I am a child of the 60s, forever young, and want very much to still be active. My late father, Dr. David Medved, was a scientist and a serial entrepreneur and was working on his optical communications startup until the week before he died at age 83 and too young. But I want to be productive like that forever. I think that, I'm not a workaholic, so to speak. I like enjoying myself. I like vacations. I like social events. I like drinking single malt, preferably 18 years and older, much older. But I think that this, in the Jewish tradition, this notion of retirement doesn't exist. Okay. In other words, I think one of the real tragedies that we're facing is that people who are living much longer are being moved aside from their jobs. There are these mandatory retirement plans. And so you take somebody who's 65 or 70, who's really at the peak of their game, and we need to learn from them. We need to engage them. And this is scary to me personally, frankly. Okay, because I'm just so not into slowing down mode. I'm into speeding up and moving fast and breaking things and fixing things. And I hope that I can have the koyach, the strength, to get up in the morning and to stay up late at night and to have fun and to do this. This is a real privilege.
But Jon, it's inspiring, and we certainly wish you much strength to continue going from Mechayel El Choyel, from strength to strength. You making the world a better place. You're a partner with God, and that should certainly continue to incentivize you. Just one final question before you go. It's late in Israel, and we thank you again for staying up this late for this interview. Very simple question, and that is, do you think the world will be a better place post-pandemic? And if so, in what way?
Yes, I think that once we're done with this, there will be a huge sense of relief and a sense of advancement of humankind. It's sort of, a lot of people are using war analogies to describe what we're going through. This is World War III. The enemy is the virus. And if you look back at World War II, at the beginning of the war, there were these biplanes flying all over Europe and the States. By the end of the war, everything was a jet airplane. Okay, there was a massive change that happened. And it was also terrible costs, especially to our people. I have a feeling that let's hope that the terrible costs can be contained this time. But the massive change is going to be, in general, positive on a technology side. And I think it's up to us to prove that it can be made positive on a human side. That these acts of chesed, the acts of coming together, of firgun in Hebrew, to be, dan lakaf zchut, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to come together, to realize that we're one little planet where so much of this stupidity, which passes for, hatred and fighting each other, makes no sense, that we should work together, that people should truly understand what a gift life is and how important it is. When you see heroes, like people on the front lines of these hospitals who are putting their life in jeopardy to save lives, and that they are being appropriately held up as the standard, I'm hoping that's going to have an impact on all these little kids who are watching this and saying, I want to save lives. I want to help people. I want to build things that makes life better, that feeds the planet, that solves our problems with the environment. Because the pandemic will be beaten at some point, God willing. But then we have a whole series of additional agenda items to get to. And I'm hoping that through the victory, the ultimate victory, may it come bimhera b'yameinu, speedily in our days, that we'll realize that it's on to the next struggle. And in that struggle, we can be partners with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with God himself, and create a better life for all of us. We should be healthy. People should be safe. They should call their parents and their grandparents, give their kids or their loved ones a hug. And we're going to get through this, and it's going to be better at the end.
Jon, thank you so much for sharing your passion, and you've inspired many, I'm sure. And we wish you, on behalf of all our viewers, continued health. You, along with your wife and your family and your children and grandchildren, for many years to come. May you continue in your being a good partner with God in making this world a better place and in giving the Jewish people a good name.
Amen.
Jon, thank you so much. Stay healthy, stay safe, and may we share only good news.
Amen. See you soon.
Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Bye-bye.